So one of my previous videos, we did the front wheel bearing hub on this Cadillac, and it was a joy.
And now we have the opportunity
to do the rear. Opportunity to do the rear. So
everything a positive.
We're in for a day of fun. But we have new tools since the ones we used on the front didn't work. I don't remember what this. I don't know what this is actually called, but its purpose is to bolt it to the hub and then bang on it with a sledgehammer.
Hub buster or some approximation of that.
So, since he didn't bring his slide hammer, we're forced to go directly to the big guns when we get to that point. So we're going to get the pads for the lift positioned and get it up in the air, take off the rear wheel. None of that is very exciting, so we'll resume when we're getting ready to start actually taking stuff apart. Okay, so I've been inventing. I'm planning for when I'm in my old age and I'm decrepit. Watch your fender. Build a rack out of my drywall hoist to actually support a tire when I take it off. This is the first time we're trying it. Part of the plan is to get a piece of pipe insulation to pad that so that we don't have problems. Put it up higher.
Yep.
Actually, a little bit more. Actually move the tire a little bit and then back it up. A little bit higher. You're hung up on the lug nuts, I think.
How does it go down?
You have to.
Yep. If you just screw on some holders there.
Yep.
Good to go.
The thing is made out of pipe. If you looked at my last video with the oil change, I pointed out some of the things I've done with the drywall hoist. So in making this rack with this 1/2 inch pipe, I'm going to put some elbows here so that I can put some pipes going up to retain it so it doesn't fall. So we're ready to.
You have anything today?
Okay, we added some temporary supports to keep that tire from falling off. Gonna zoom in on those to see. All I did, I had a T. I really would rather have an elbow, and I had several pieces of pipe in the union over there, so I'm going to buy some 12-inch pieces of pipe like the one on the left and elbows. And the thing is, you can make those tight enough so that a little bit of effort you can put it upright, or a little bit of effort to take it down comes down easily. So that tire's not going to fall off of there.
If I were black or something of that nature.
So we have gotten 2 of the 3 bolts that hold the hub onto the spindle there broken loose. One's about a 1/2 inch out and one's about a 1/4 inch out, and then what happens is it runs into the CV joint. You can't take it out any further. We're having trouble getting the socket even onto the nut that holds the hub on, or the bolt that holds the hub on. So what we're doing here is we have an old brake drum. We're mounting it backwards on the flange where your tire bolts. We're going to bolt it on, and we're going to use this puller to actually push the axle and therefore the CV joint back so that it gives us some room. So we'll see how that works.
Before that, we took the wheel off with a 22 millimeter. We took the caliper off with 14 top and bottom. We took the caliper bracket off with an 18 on top, a 13 on the bottom. We took the digital sensor for the magnet off with a 10. And we took the spindle nut off with, while he's looking at that, we also took after we took the spindle nut off, we took the Torx from the rotor off with a T30, but we did that after we did the spindle so that the shaking of the spindle would loosen the T30.
We used a 1 3/8 to take the spindle nut off. I believe it probably should be a 36 millimeter, but a 1 3/8 from a 3/4 inch Harbor Freight socket set works. That's what we used in the front. That's what we used in the back. So here we go. So it took us a little while to find enough nuts to hold that on. And what we ended up doing is we had a couple bolts, nuts that fit, and then we had the lug nuts, but they were going to bottom out on the top of the stud before they held this on. So we got some really big nuts and just used them as spacers and tightened them up against that, so that now we have the sacrificial brake rotor, because it's an old one that was off of something, I'm not sure what. So now we're going to try to push the axle through the hub so that it gives us more room to get into the thing. The other thing that's worth mentioning, and I like to do this a lot because sometimes you can get a better swing with your wrench from a far distance. So I actually used about a 20-inch extension and put that thing way almost under the center of the car and got the socket on the bolt. It gave us enough room. We're working with a lift, but we put a breaker bar on it, and then it's only a 3/8 breaker bar, so it's not very long. But we put a pipe on the end of that, and we were able to get a good swing. Whereas if you just took the, try to use a wrench, then what you're looking at is you've got to put the wrench in here, and the longest breaker you can get is probably about 20 inches. We had probably closer to 30 or 36 inches, so that we got a lot of leverage to break those bolts loose, and they were very tight. So what we've been fighting with here is getting this socket on. We finally got it on. Unfortunately, and this is probably a good warning for anybody attempting this, we damaged the head on that just a little bit by trying to use a 12-point socket. So now we've got a 6-point socket on there. It's on there pretty good. We're going to tap it on. It may get stuck. We may have to take some serious measures to unstick it when we're done with it. But we've got it on, and believe we have a good swing with our breaker bar and our extra leverage bar, that we can get this off, I think. And it's on all the way. Problem we might have now is we've got the breaker bar, which doesn't have a ratcheting head, and it's got to fit in the extension we have on there, right where it's at, and
Not much.
there's not much room. Let me shut this off a second.
Good. I have no swing. It's just flexing that far.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. So we need to actually take that nut or that socket off again and rotate it one.
Am I on?
Yes, you are. Okay. So we took off one. Did it come?
Yep.
Now that's the one that's really rusty. So if you tighten it, if it starts to get hard,
Gonna have to run it out.
tighten it back in and get some of the crud off of that.
We're gonna try switching to the
The ratchet with
Ratchet,
the breaker
right.
bar or the extension should work now. Yep, it's turning.
good news.
That is good news, yes. So, like I said, that was kind of rusty. It may build up some rust in the threads, and then when it starts to get too tight to turn, the way you handle that is you turn it back in, get the crud out of there, and then loosen until it tightens up. You might have to do it a dozen times or more, but it does work without breaking any of the bolts or anything. So we got all the bolts that hold the hub on loose to the point where there's about 3/8 of an inch of the stem of the bolt showing in the back. So we've got room to knock that thing off and
Not have to go flying.
not have it go flying. And once it's loose, they're loose enough that we can take them off with whatever kind of tool we need to get in there. So we're going to take off the puller and put on the hub whacker or whatever it is and go from there. So as you probably know, there's many videos of using this tool on the internet, and I watched a video of one guy, and he was hitting it he hit it like 100 times, but what I noticed is he didn't always have it on the top. Most of the time he was beating on it while it's on the bottom, and if you think about where the force is going to go, if this is on the bottom, when you hit it, it's going to push in rather than pull out. So this thing has got to be up on the top in order for it to work very well. At least that's my opinion. That's my
Also, this has to be supported, or else your spring is taking all of your effort.
Yep. So we're going to put a jack stand under it, if we can find a good place to put it, and lower it down to where we're compressing that spring so that when we hit that with the sledgehammer, the force is going to remove the hub rather than being absorbed by the spring or by having it underneath it. You know, from the bottom, the force is not pushing it on. We want the force to be taking it off. And since this involves a sledgehammer near his car, I'm going to let him do the honors of swinging the sledge because I claim no responsibility. So we've got It's supported with the jack stand. We're working from the top so that it pulls away. We're going to just do it a couple strikes at a time and see what's going on. Got an 8-pound sledge and give it some juice.
Sure when I'm going to be able to see it. These should start pulling in, so there's still quite a bit of space there. Hold on. Okay, what we've seen already is there's some movement. There's starting to be some separation between the back plate and the spindles, and actually the hub and the back plate. So that looked like that moved some, Craig. Whack it. Okay. So what we're finding out is that we've got a catch-22 here with that hub grabber or whatever it's called on there. We can't push in the axle, and that's where we need to go now, is we need to push the axle in. So we're going to put the brake rotor back on and the puller and push the axle back. That will give us clearance to get a wrench or a socket on the bolts that actually hold the hub in. But as we were talking off camera, the tool did its job. Not too much work. Probably would have done it a little quicker if we'd have been a little more aggressive with the sledgehammer. Yep. Took us 5 hours to get one out on the front, and that's even using the front steering as a hydraulic press.
Right.
This took 3 minutes.
Once we got down to it. But it was 5 hours from the time we got down to it too, so that is a fair comparison. So there, right there is the break in the ring, and that's the cause of the ABS lights and all those traction control and all those other things. So what we had done once we had knocked that loose, the 3 bolts were holding the hub on. So we went under there and removed the bolts, and it came right out. So now we have cleaned up the area here where the hub goes in, lubed it up with some wheel bearing grease, put some wheel bearing grease on the axle splines so that if we have to ever take it off again, might not be so hard. And we're getting ready to put the hub in. So need to hold the axle up on the back side, or needs to be twisted a little bit.
generally design, but you have to, I think probably a thin post to make sure we're, where do you have the pegs?
Wrench in the other crash. Okay, I've got one of them started. Go on this side, see if I can get the other one.
You have only these thin pegs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then never mind. I've got one started already. And what we need to do is basically get the socket on the other end so that we can actually turn or wrench. So we can turn them to get them started, because the problem is
Which one do you have started?
I have, I think, the top two. Yeah, top two are started. So the third one ought to be lined up.
In theory.
If I can reach it. See, and that's where you probably need to put the socket on it from the other side and just spin it and go right in. I cannot get that in.
Can you kick that light away?
Oh, it's in your eyes now. Which one are you looking at? The bottom one's the one I need.
On you or is it?
It's on me.
I can see that bottom one from down here.
Oh, if you put the wrench on it, the other turn it, because the other two are started. You know, don't. I take that back. Put the socket on it. Turn it with your hands, because they don't want you to cross thread it. I want to make sure it's. I know what you mean. They don't actually started. I believe it gets started. You ready to get the socket on it?
I have a socket with soil stations.
Come on, you can do it. I have to do everything.
There is no clearance there.
There has to be some clearance, because we got it off.
Yeah, but not like this. I'm going to get
You know what?
a 13.
You know what? We had
Open.
the axle back a little bit. We had that pulley we took down to the barn. On there. So
I'm going to try for the 13 open end. I should be able to get that on it.
yeah, that was what we had. We had this pushed back.
Yep.
Are you serious? And we took the puller back.
That, what you just did, open up space, hold it just like that, and perhaps I can.
So what I'm doing here is I'm pushing back on the axle so that there's room to get the socket in there. Hopefully.
That's not what I'm promising. Double check this is a 13. Yep.
Got the wrong end in?
That'll do it.
Well,
It's in my hand.
you're not the first person that's done that today.
Alright, we are spinning, so I need a wrench. I need the ratchet. Ratchet.
Make sure you put it on tighten.
This one is broken.
What? You broke it. Good thing it's Craftsman. All I gotta do is figure out where I can take a Craftsman to get it replaced.
Oh, this one is backwards.
I can't get that on there either. So using the breaker bar on the ratchet, or the extension on the ratchet probably is how we broke the selector off, but Craftsman doesn't know who I am. We will take it back. You know what will probably happen on that is we'll take it back and they won't have one that's that short and it won't fit in my case anymore.
Probably.
Okay, so we're just going to tighten up these bolts and then we'll be back in a bit. So we finally got that on. Two things that we find helpful is when you're putting those 3 bolts back in that hold the hub on, you got to tighten them down, you know, one at a time and pull it in slowly so that you pull the hub in pretty much in line with the axle. Otherwise it tries to get cocked in there and doesn't want to go. The other thing was it helped us a lot to have that puller on there to push the axle back, because that's the only way we could really get a socket in there past the drive shaft CV joint boot. So it's
the same way you took it off, put it back on.
pretty much take it off the way you, or put it on the way you took it off in reverse. Okay, when we put that back on, the axle didn't pop all the way through. So what we did is just took a crowbar and lifted up on the axle at the strong metal part, and it popped right in. Not moving anymore. Okay, time for torque wrench. Do you know the torque spec? It's in the trunk. Nice. Okay. Got to get the torque spec out of the trunk. So putting it back together, just when you put the rotor on, use some brake cleaner on it. Make sure you line up the torque screw that holds the rotor on, although it's not really necessary. It's not going anywhere with the tire there, but if you can, you can put it back in. And then, what else are we doing here, Craig? We've pushed back the piston already on the caliper. And
Right now I'm mounting the bracket.
right now we're mounting the caliper mounting bracket, followed by the caliper, the tire, and we're done. Beers you don't even drink, but I might have one. One last tip, because you've pushed back the caliper, you need to make sure you pump up those brakes and get a good hard pedal before you move that car. Other than that, torquing the tire on and we're done. Have a nice day.